These 5 picket railing mistakes are so common, I see them on almost every single deck demolition that we do. After over 30 years in the business, I'm tired of seeing people waste time and money over and over making the same mistakes all the time. All right guys, so I'm gonna do a little visual because the first thing that I see wrong quite often is actual spacing of railing panels. So to get that right, it takes a little bit of pre-planning. Now you can do that with a pencil and a piece of paper. Mathematically, this one's a little bit different because we have pre-existing posts in the deck, okay? So for this particular part of the project that we're on, this rail section here is gonna have a post, one in the middle, and one over here. And we're gonna be attaching our railing right to the post. So it's really not that difficult to figure out the spacing, but it still needs to be thought of. And if you do it wrong, your sections of railing aren't gonna be equal, and then your pickets won't lay out equally either. Just as an example, here's our post over here. Here's our post over here. We know that we're gonna add one rail post in the middle. So that's a pretty easy figure. We just make sure that from post to post, not to base plate, because we're using an aluminum, Regal Ideas aluminum picket railing. That's what we're using for this build, okay? So we just want to make sure that the distance between posts are the same length. It's going to be close to 8 feet. What's cool about Regal Ideas picket railing is it'll span 8 feet because it all locks together. The pickets interlock to the top rail and the bottom rail, which happen to be the sponsors of this video, by the way. Thank you, Regal Ideas. Let's say these posts weren't here, and we had a deck rail post here, and a deck rail post here, and one here, and one here. Now we have 3 equal spaces. How do you figure that out? What I do, from this point, what you want to do is figure out where this post goes and where this post goes, and commit to those 2 spaces. Then I take this measurement from the left side, like you're reading a book, okay? Like you're reading a book. So you're going left to right, okay? You're gonna read the left side of this base plate and the left side of this base plate. And let's say that's just 189 inches. I just pulled that out of the earth. So we're gonna go to our construction calculator, and we're gonna take 189 inches, and you wanna divide that by how many rail gaps you have. So it doesn't matter how many posts you have, you gotta figure out how many rail sections are gonna be in that run. That's how you figure this out. So I have 3 sections of railing, okay? So I wanna divide 189 divided by 3. 189 inches divided by 3 equals 63 inches. So each one of these would be 63 inches. And that's gonna be from base plate to base plate and base plate to base plate of the left side, because we're reading from left to right. So if you measure from this base plate, 63 inches, that's where the next base plate edge is. The left side edge of your base plate goes there. Then you measure another 63 and lay this one out, and you measure another 63 and measure this one out. Then, just for safety, okay, I know for a fact, like, that works for me. I don't know if that's gonna work for you, but it works for me every single time. But if you're not sure, because if you mess this up, it really ruins things for you. It can really ruin things for you, especially if you have to put one extra picket in one rail section. And if you're OCD like me and you're sitting down on your deck and you got one rail section with one extra picket, it'll drive me berserk for the rest of my life, like every time I go out and sit on my deck. So I gotta make sure that these 3 sections are equally spaced. Also, it helps when you're putting in your pickets and you're trying to do the end spacing so that everything's equal, that each section has about the same space between the post and the first picket and the last picket. So everything is equal spaced, okay? We'll get into that later in this video. If you wanna make sure, mock up this section and then measure in between your posts and make sure whatever distance you have in between your posts, it's gonna be like 2 inches extra, so it'll be around 65 inches from post to post. So go back through and just make sure everything's 65 or close to it. So if you're 63 from the left, from your post section here to your post section here, in between those is probably gonna be about 65 inches. I don't know, I'm just guessing, guys, but just make sure all 3 sections are within 1/4 inch and you'll be cool. So that's one thing that I've seen. I've torn down more modern railing, And I can't believe some of the mistakes I've seen that people make when they're installing railing. So that's just one thing that to think about, is have really good spacing on all of your posts. Cool, so we know where our post needs to go. So another common mistake or issues that I've seen in the past is where you put your fasteners, how you're fastening, what you're fastening into are all questions that you need to have answers for. So what we're doing is we're doing a hybrid deck. Most of the deck's aluminum. Some of it is wood. So we have to have fasteners that can go into aluminum framing and some fasteners that can go into wood framing. So this again is gonna be a little bit different than your particular circumstance, but it's always good to pre-drill your holes with the proper size of pre-drill so that you can make sure that the fasteners go in where you want them and that you're not overboring the hole or underboring the hole and creating splits, cracks, or a potential catastrophic failure. I went under the deck and pre-measured. We had the luxury of being able to get under the deck. I kind of pre-measured some stuff. I know where the post needs to go. I know that I want to be about 1/4 inch away from the inside of this fascia board. So I'm gonna go ahead and just draw a line like so. Just something for reference. Now my post is gonna be on this side because I have a section of rail going from this post here to this post here and then down the stairs. So this post has to go to that side of that line and I need to be 1 inch away from the edge, not from the fascia, but from the edge of the decking. Again, a little bit different type of deck because we have this flashing detail here. We didn't put fascia on a lot of the deck. So I'm measuring to the outside of this board and not all this fascia and things like that. If I was, it'd be 2 inches instead of 1 inch, okay? But as long as we get it close. So there's my 1 inch. Here's a line. I'm gonna draw another line here. And there's a couple different ways that you can go about marking holes. Sometimes we just pre-drill and put in our fasteners, but also there's different types of, like I got a Picket marker here. You could go in and draw circles, something with a narrow throat on it that will get inside of these holes. So this is kind of like a Sharpie, but a little bit more accurate, okay? So if I pull this post, there's my holes. I could go ahead and pre-drill these holes now if I want to go ahead and knock them out before I put in my fasteners. So let's go ahead and do that. Now these two holes are going to be into aluminum. These two holes are going to be into wood. So I'm using a 3/16 drill bit to knock those out. Okay. You can see the aluminum coming out. Now it should be into wood. Yep, there's the wood. Okay, so now I have nice clean drilled holes. I'm not gonna plumb this post yet because it's not ready for it, but we can go ahead and get the fasteners installed. And then again, we're using two different types of fasteners. We're using a stainless steel 2.5 inch into our aluminum. It's threaded all the way up. So this will be able to lock down this side of the post and attach to the aluminum properly since we've pre-drilled the right diameter hole. Thing is, you can't go too hot and heavy on those fasteners because you can overdrive the fastener and strip it. So I'm only doing one of those. I'm gonna go ahead and plumb my post out, or excuse me, square my post out, not plumb it, just square it out. And now that I have that ready, for the wood, I'm using a Fasten Master ledger lock, and that takes a different bit. I'm gonna do an opposing side. And I'm just gonna make them snug. I'm not gonna overdrive them. I'm not gonna go gunga din on them. Notice I'm using an extension. That helps keep the drill off the post while we're driving them, the fasteners in. And then I'll put this one in. And again, I'm not going crazy. That post is really installed well. And it's in the right spot. We have a little base plate cover that will go over the top of this and cover all these fasteners up. So it doesn't matter they're mismatched or that they're the wrong color. None of that matters right now. We will go back and plumb this post, which means we'll make it level both ways once we have the top rail and the bottom rail installed on this post here. That is another thing though that I see all the time that's a fail is people they don't have enough support underneath the deck. They're just putting the screws into decking, and then the screws poking right through the bottom of the deck board. There's no additional support. So make sure that you're supporting the underside of this post and that it has something solid to attach to, and that you have a positive connection, because that's something that you can get called out on a building inspection and possibly fail because you didn't have the proper blocking and support you needed for the post. All right, guys, and while I have you on the topic of the fasteners, that's something else I've seen is people using inferior fasteners or fasteners that won't hold up over time, or that corrode, or that don't work with certain pressure treated lumber. Well, the fasteners that we're installing into the aluminum are stainless steel. Now, we've had people ask, hey, doctor, isn't that galvanic corrosion? Isn't that dissimilar metals? Isn't that gonna have a problem? Well, these are high quality stainless steel fasteners. They are also powder coated on top of being stainless steel. And it's kind of like, when you're using a little bit of stainless into aluminum, it's not as catastrophic as if you're using a lot of aluminum into stainless. Like, how do they make Boeing airplanes? They have lots of aluminum and a lot of stainless steel rivets. All those stainless steel rivets are holding the plane together, but there's no galvanic corrosion on an airplane wing. So we're using 2 fasteners that are stainless steel, and yes, it's an aluminum post that's powder coated. It's going to a frame that's powder coated. We've drilled a hole through the frame, so we've exposed the aluminum, and we're putting in a stainless steel fastener, but it's not going to have a reaction, at least anytime soon, for the next 50 years. So I'm confident that that's gonna work. For the other 2 fasteners, we're using a product called a ledger lock, which is actually designed to attach a fastener to the ledger of a house. It's designed to keep the ledger attached to the house, and in an earthquake or any kind of seismic motion or just thermal cycles, all that stuff, to keep the fastener from ripping off the house and to keep it from shearing in any type of seismic activity. So if these fasteners are designed for that, and they also have a special coating that's resistant to pressure treated materials, these fasteners work very well. I wholeheartedly will hold any deck off of this brand and this type of fastener. I also like to use them for any wood intrusion that we're gonna do for our posts. So just having products with a great coating on them that's gonna last a very long time, regardless if they're stainless steel or carbon steel, just depends on what you're doing with it, and how you're doing it will determine what type of fasteners we're gonna use for our posts. But make sure that you're using something that has good corrosion resistance, especially if you're in a marine environment or something like that. Probably go all stainless steel, but in this particular install, this is what we're using. All right, so the last 2 topics we have about Picket railing are both visual and audio. So one has to do with being loose. Loose pickets in certain metal railing systems vibrate. Like when kids are running on the deck and different things, they rattle. So one thing I like about the Regal Ideas system is they have patented an interlocking picket system that locks into the top rail and the bottom rail of the picket railing. So if you see this groove right here, there's a matching mating groove on the inside of the top rail and the inside of the bottom rail. And when these lock together, you can kind of feel it up in there. And then when these pickets go in, they lock into that. So that keeps these from vibrating. Even if the picket spacers, which we'll put in after this, are loose, it keeps the sound down because everything is kind of set together. That is a kind of an important factor. So we have this short little section of rail, and we only need 3 pickets for it, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and knock these in, and you can kind of tell when the pickets are installed properly because they'll move back and forth quite easily in the track. This is a little bit more work than a standard aluminum rail system because we're mounting to the side of a post and then we're mounting a rail post, but it's still a lot quicker than if we're doing a wood rail system where we had to come up with a way to mount the post to the deck, and then top rails, bottom rails, a top cap, and then side rails. This is all pretty much integrated. So the one thing that I'm gonna talk about next is definitely picket spacing, okay? See how that kind of just moves back and forth? It's nice and loose, but it still will not move up and down. You can go up to 8 feet wide on this rail system and it'll still meet the code. Okay, so what I had to do, I had to get these 3 pickets in here so I could figure out my spacing. Now, when I do a picket rail system, I like to make sure that all my pickets are spaced equally. It comes with pre-cut picket spacers. So these picket spacers go in between the pickets like this. They snap in. We're working on a really narrow section of railing, but you can apply this technique and all these techniques to any length you have. But what you have to do is you have to install the picket spacers, right? And these snap on, so they'll go on like so, okay? And those go on top and bottom. Now on a wider section, we would actually start from left to right, just like we did earlier with the post layout. And we would start with a standard width picket right up against the post. But because we have such a narrow space, that's obviously not an answer for this particular install. So we're just gonna lock down the 2 picket spacers that we need, and then we're gonna figure out our gap, because all the field pickets are spaced the same. And then the end 2 gaps are spaced the same. So I need to make this gap and this gap the same width, okay? And that's what I'm gonna do right now. And usually, if your posts are plumb, then the bottom opening is gonna be about the same as the top opening as far as width. I'm not gonna measure from this wrap, I'm gonna measure from the post, because this gap and this gap I want the same. If I'm not too worried about this little gap right here, I know it's gonna be narrower. But I have 13 7/8 here and 13 7/8 plus. So I'm a 1/16 wider on top than I am on the bottom, but that's pretty good. I'm not gonna be tripping on that at all. So now what I want is, now that I have these 2 pickets tight together, regardless if this is 2 pickets or 20 pickets, does not matter, we want them tight. Then we have to figure out our gaps. So if I have 2 inches over here and I have 1 3/4 inches over here, I wanna move this over to 1 7/8 because I want both sides to be about 1 7/8 away. So there's 1 7 inches. Now let's knock this over and make sure I've got 1 7 inches over here. It's very close. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and give myself 1 7/8 here, which I just gotta come 1/8 inch this way, okay? There's 1 7 inches there, and then I'm gonna knock these over. I'm 1 7/8 there. I'm 1 7/8 there. So now that I have an equal gap, now I can fill in these lower spaces where there's missing picket spacers to cap this off, okay? So that's what I'm gonna do next. And again, because I have an obstacle here, this is gonna have a narrower space than everything else, but we have a nice equal gap here and a nice equal gap here. And that's the important part to me. I've seen it where guys have just taken 2 pickets because they needed an extra thickness of a picket and just put them together. And it totally ruined the look of the rail. I just feel that if you're gonna do this, you might as well do it with a little panache, a little pizzazz, and give it a really nice look. So all I have left to do is make these little caps, and then this section of the rail's done, and I can just move on to the next one. All right, so now I'm just gonna take some measurements, and there's a couple different ways I've done this in the past, but usually a tape measure works pretty good because I'm not up against anything here, but you'll notice, even though the gap is equal here and here, these 2 lengths are gonna be different because on this side, I'm going up to the post, but on this side, I have to go up to this bracket. So I'm losing 1/4 inch of my spacer. Everything I'm doing is gonna have a little bit different distance in it. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go cut the top and bottom picket spacer for here, and I'm gonna move everything tight to that side. Then I'll finish my measurements for here and here. So that way, this is exactly the same width. Okay, so I'm gonna go cut 2 at 1 7 inches, and once you come over to the chop socks, I'm gonna show you a little trick how I cut these without cutting my fingers off. The safest way to cut these picket spacers without them flinging out of your hands, without danger to yourself, is take a scrap piece of bottom rail that comes in your kit and you just snap on the picket spacer right onto the bottom rail. Now this is not a scrap, but we're gonna use it as a scrap because it's more of a scrap than my fingers are. So there's 1.7 inches and there's 1.7 inches. So if I cut this right, that's kind of odd and ironic, but if I cut this right, the thickness of the blade, I'll have 2 7/8 inch pieces that I can use for our first 2 picket spacers. Okay, and then these just slide right off. Okay, I'm gonna double check them for height. Oh, this one's a little bit taller than this one, so I'm gonna go ahead and shave that just a little tiny bit, just to make them equal. Okay, now they're pretty close. Awesome, now let's take those back. All right, so I've got my first 2 spacers cut and they're going on this side, top and bottom. So I'm gonna put one right here and it's a little snug, so I'm just gonna move this over, whoop, moved it over just enough so I can get this ready to go. Okay, that's snapped in. Now I'm gonna move all these over nice and snug. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing up top. Okay, sometimes you can just grab it with your hands and do it. Sometimes you need a mallet, a little bit of persuasion, right? Okay, so now I've got this side locked in. I have my standard picket spacers in the middle. Now all I have to do is finish off these 2 closure caps or picket spacers, whatever you wanna call them, and we're done. This one needs to be, I'm gonna say 3/4 of an inch. It's not very big. That's a dangerous cut, so just be careful when you guys cut that one. I could probably go 3/4 plus. That'd be 13/16 for all you particulars. And then over here, I've got 1 5/8 inches. Okay, I'll be right back. This is a very small spot. There we go. Probably could have made that a little bit tighter. But you'll notice, like, this stuff doesn't vibrate, doesn't make noise. I think I'm gonna have to go trim that one up. I mean, it's close. If you start trying to force these in, you can scratch parts and pieces and you're doing touch-up. So it's either you get it to fit just below the threshold of scratching, or you smack it in there and then you gotta fix the paint. Sometimes if you try to bring it in from the other side, that works. But I am so bloody close that I think I'm just gonna go ahead and shave this just a little bit. Be right back. There we go. All right, guys, so those are 5 things that you need to think about when you're installing your aluminum rail or just any kind of railing handrail system. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified when we're putting out new content. Also, click the link below if you want to enter your deck into a possible video on our channel. And don't forget to check out our podcast, links below as well. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.